no one
Look at that
stopped
poor thing.
as an old,
Yeah,
weakened dog
awful.
was left behind in freezing temperatures,
Come on, it's
waiting
freezing.
in silence. It didn't fight, didn't bark, as if it had already accepted the end, until a Navy SEAL appeared and chose not to walk away like everyone else. But this wasn't just a rescue. It was a journey of two souls saving each other in the harsh winter. When the storm came, the one who seemed weakest did something no one expected. Would you have stayed when everything felt hopeless? Tell us where you're watching from, and don't forget to like and subscribe. Help us reach 1,000 followers to keep sharing meaningful stories. Now, let's begin the story. The wind did not howl that afternoon. It moved quietly. A slow, cold breath across the back of the abandoned lot, carrying the smell of old gasoline, damp cardboard, and melting snow that had long since lost its purity. The sky above was pale and stretched thin, as if winter itself had grown tired of holding its shape. Behind a shuttered grocery store, on the edge of a small northern town, the parking lot lay half-buried under gray slush. Tire tracks cut through the snow in uneven lines, already fading. A broken shopping cart leaned on its side near a rusted dumpster, its metal frame whining softly whenever the wind shifted. And there, beside a dented light pole, the dog lay. It did not bark. It did not whine. It did not even lift its head. A German shepherd, once built for strength, now reduced to angles and shadows. Its body was too thin, ribs pressing sharply against its skin like the fragile slats of a broken crate. Its coat, a tangled mix of cream, gray, and black, had lost its sheen and clung to its frame in dull, uneven patches, stiff with frozen dirt and old neglect. A frayed rope was tied loosely around the base of the pole, cut halfway through. Not enough to free, just enough to suggest someone had stopped caring before finishing the act. The dog's eyes were open, clouded slightly, dulled by exhaustion. But not empty. Not yet. They held something faint, something flickering low like a dying ember that refused to go out simply because it had forgotten how. People passed. They always did. A man in a heavy coat crossed the lot, his boots crunching through the slush. He slowed for half a second when he saw the dog, his brow tightening slightly, but the cold bit at his face, and he pulled his collar higher, quickening his pace. A young woman mid-20s, long blonde hair tucked under a wool hat, cheeks flushed from the cold, paused near the edge of the lot. She raised her phone for a moment, hesitated, then lowered it. Her lips parted as if to speak, but no sound came. After a second, she turned and walked away, her footsteps lighter, faster. An older woman, small and stooped, wrapped in layers of faded coats, stopped longer than the others. Her gloved hands trembled slightly as she looked down at the dog. There was something in her eyes, recognition, perhaps, or memory, but after a long breath, she shook her head slowly, murmured something under it, and continued on. No one kicked it. No one shouted. No one hurt it. They simply did not stay. The dog did not call out. It did not try to follow. It lay still, breathing shallowly, as if each inhale had to be negotiated with something deep inside its chest. Waiting was no longer an action. It was simply what remained. The truck came late in the day. Old, faded red paint dulled by years of winter roads. The engine rumbled low, uneven, like a tired animal that refused to stop moving. It pulled into the lot slowly, paused, then cut. The silence that followed felt heavier than before. The driver's door opened with a dull creak. Kyle Donovan stepped out. He was tall, just over 6 feet, with a build that spoke not of display, but of function. Lean muscle, compact strength, the kind shaped by repetition rather than vanity. His movements were economical, precise, as if every unnecessary motion had been trained out of him long ago. His face was clean-shaven, the sharp lines of his jaw and cheekbones exposed without softness. His skin, though naturally fair, had been weathered by years of cold air and harsher places, leaving it slightly rough, slightly uneven. His hair, dark brown, was cut short in a military style, though not perfectly maintained, just long enough to show he no longer needed regulation, but had not forgotten it either. His eyes were gray-blue, calm, not distant, not warm, just aware. He wore a worn, olive-gray tactical combat shirt, the fabric softened with age, faintly frayed at the cuffs and shoulders. Beneath it, a darker red thermal layer showed at the collar. His pants' earth-toned combat trousers were faded at the knees, the fabric worn where time and movement had pressed against it. Old military work boots crunched lightly against the slush as he took a few steps forward. On his wrist, a scratched military watch sat snug, its face dulled, but still ticking. He did not approach immediately. He stopped a few feet away. Looked. Not quickly. Not casually. The kind of look that measured, that observed, that understood more than it needed to say. The dog did not react, not because it trusted him, but because it no longer had the strength to distrust. Kyle exhaled slowly, the breath visible in the cold. He took another step, then another, until he stood close enough to see the small details, how the dog's chest rose unevenly, how its paws were cracked and raw, how the rope had rubbed faint irritation into the fur around its neck. He crouched. Not sudden, not threatening, just lowering himself until he was closer to the ground. For a moment, he said nothing. The wind shifted. Somewhere, a loose sheet of metal tapped softly against a wall. Kyle reached out, slowly. His hand hovered for a second over the dog's head. Waiting. Testing. The dog did not flinch. It did not lean in. It simply remained. His hand settled gently against its fur. Cold. Thinner than it should have been. He felt the bone beneath. Felt how little was left between skin and structure. "All right," he said quietly. His voice was low, steady, not coaxing, not commanding. Just there. "I've got you." The dog did not respond. But something small, almost imperceptible, shifted in its breathing. As Kyle slid his arm carefully beneath the dog's body, preparing to lift it, the dog's head moved. Just slightly. Its eyes, clouded and tired, lifted not toward him, but past him, toward the empty lot. For a second, Kyle paused. He followed the direction of that gaze. There was nothing there. Just the light pole, the cut rope, the fading tracks in the snow. No car, no person, no sign of whoever had left it. Yet the dog kept looking, not with hope, not with fear, but with something quieter, as if it had already learned. No one was coming back. Kyle jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Then he adjusted his grip. "Yeah," he murmured. "I get it." And with that, he lifted the dog. The weight surprised him. Not because it was heavy, but because it wasn't. A dog of that size should have been solid, grounded. This one felt fragile, too light, as if it had already begun to leave. Kyle stood, cradling it carefully against his chest, keeping its head supported. The dog did not resist. Its body remained slack, breath shallow but steady. He turned toward the truck. Each step deliberate, boots pressing into the slush with a soft, consistent rhythm. The door opened. He laid the dog gently across the passenger seat, adjusting it so it wouldn't slide. For a second, his hand lingered at its neck, thumb resting lightly against the worn fur. "Stay," he said softly. Not as a command, more like a request. He closed the door, walked around, got in. The engine turned over with a low growl. As the truck pulled away from the lot, the tires crunching through the thin layer of ice, the abandoned space behind them grew smaller. The pole, the rope, the place where the dog had lain, it disappeared quickly, like it had never mattered. Inside the truck, the heater clicked on slowly, pushing out air that was only slightly warmer than the cold it replaced. The dog did not move much, but its breathing shifted again. Deeper, still weak, but present. Kyle kept one hand lightly on the steering wheel, the other occasionally resting near the edge of the seat, close enough to feel if the dog moved, but not touching. He drove in silence. No music, no calls, just the low hum of the engine and the soft rhythm of breath beside him. After a few minutes, he spoke again. "Don't worry about anything else right now." His eyes stayed on the road. "Just stay." The word lingered, not heavy, not urgent, just steady. The town passed in quiet fragments, dim storefronts, a flickering streetlight, a lone figure shoveling snow near a doorway. Life continued, unchanged, unaware. By the time the truck reached the road leading out toward the edge of town, toward the scattered cabins and tree lines where the world felt a little less crowded, the sky had begun to darken. The light thinned. The cold deepened. But inside the truck, something had shifted. Not dramatically. Not enough to be seen from the outside. But enough. The dog's head rested slightly differently against the seat. Its breathing, though still fragile, had found a rhythm that wasn't entirely surrender. Kyle noticed. He didn't say anything. Didn't need to. He drove on. And for the first time that day, the dog was no longer waiting to be left. The clinic sat at the edge of town beside a narrow 2-lane road lined with dirty snowbanks and wind-bent pines. It was a small building with white siding gone dull from winters that never seemed to end, a green metal roof patched in 2 places, and a hand-painted sign that read North Ridge Veterinary Care. Warm light glowed from the front windows, soft and yellow against the early dark, the kind of light that made a person think of safety before they had actually stepped inside. Kyle parked close to the entrance. For a moment he stayed still behind the wheel. The heater in the truck clicked and sighed. The windshield had begun to fog at the edges. Beside him, the dog lay where he had placed it, still and quiet, its thin body curved awkwardly across the passenger seat. In the warmth, the smell of damp fur, road salt, and old neglect had become clearer. Beneath it lingered another scent, too, something metallic and sour, the smell of a body running too long on too little. Kyle looked at the dog's chest. Still rising. Still falling. That was enough to move. He got out, came around the truck, and opened the passenger door. The dog's eyes opened a fraction. Not startled. Not resistant, only tired. Kyle slipped one arm beneath its chest and the other under its hindquarters. The animal was large, even in its reduced state, a German shepherd with the long-boned frame of what should have been a powerful working dog. But what he lifted into his arms felt more like the memory of one. Inside the clinic, warmth settled over them in a wave. The waiting room smelled of disinfectant, wet wool, and old coffee. A row of plastic chairs lined one wall beneath framed photographs of farm dogs, smiling retrievers, and cats who looked vaguely offended to be immortalized. A low shelf held worn magazines and a ceramic jar of dog biscuits. Somewhere beyond the back door came the muted clink of metal instruments and the soft whir of a heater fighting the cold. At the reception counter stood a young woman in navy scrubs, probably in her late 20s. She was of medium height, with chestnut brown hair twisted into a practical knot at the base of her neck, pale freckled skin, and sharp hazel eyes that looked like they had seen many forms of panic and learned not to join them. Her name tag read Mia. There was kindness in her face, but not the soft kind that collapsed under pressure, the steadier kind built from long hours, bad news, and choosing gentleness anyway. Her mouth parted when she saw the dog. "Oh," she breathed, coming out from behind the desk at once. "Bring him back. Right away." Kyle followed her through a swinging door into an exam room where the air smelled more strongly of antiseptic and rubbing alcohol. Mia spread a thick fleece blanket over the metal table before he laid the dog down. The dog made no effort to get up. Its head stayed low, ears loose, eyes only half open. Mia touched the animal's side with practiced fingers, then its gums, then one cracked paw. "How long has he been like this?" Kyle shrugged once. "Found him behind the old market lot." She glanced up at him then, really looked at him, taking in the military bearing that survived even in stillness, the weathered edges of his face, the old tactical shirt softened by years of use. Something in her expression changed, not into pity exactly, but recognition of another kind of damage. "I'll get Dr. Bennett." She disappeared through the door. Kyle stayed where he was. The dog's fur, now beginning to thaw, revealed its true coloring under the dirt, a sable blend of cream, gray, and black. Age showed most clearly around the muzzle, where the black had silvered into a tired, salt and pepper mask. Not ancient, Kyle guessed, but old enough to have been through things. The eyes were amber under the haze, still striking even dulled by exhaustion. He reached out and rested one hand lightly on the dog's shoulder. No reaction. Not fear. Not comfort. It was the absence of protest that unsettled him most. A healthy dog guarded its pain. A frightened dog resisted. Even a dying one sometimes snarled at the world for coming too close. This one did none of those things. It lay under his hand, as if it had already stepped halfway away from whatever happened next. The door opened again. Dr. Bennett came in carrying a tablet and a stethoscope around his neck. He was a man in his late 50s, tall and slightly stooped, with a narrow frame under his flannel shirt and wool vest. His hair, once dark, had gone mostly silver and was thinning at the crown. He wore a short beard trimmed close to the face, more from habit than style, and wire-rimmed glasses that made him look more like a school principal than a veterinarian until one noticed the calm efficiency in his hands. The sort of man who had probably spent decades being trusted by animals before people fully understood why. His eyes went first to the dog, then briefly to Kyle. "Mr. Donovan." Kyle nodded once. He knew the man by sight. Small towns made strangers temporary. Dr. Bennett set the tablet down and moved to the table without rushing. He placed 2 fingers against the dog's side, listened to its heart, checked the eyes, lifted one ear, felt the spine and hips beneath the skin. His face did not change much, but the silence lengthened. Finally, he sighed through his nose. "Well," he said quietly, "he's not giving up because of one bad day." Mia stood by the cabinet, already preparing supplies. "No visible fractures," Dr. Bennett went on. "No fresh trauma I can see. Severe weight loss, dehydration, chronic neglect, most likely. He's been underfed for a while." Kyle looked at the dog's thin neck. "Can you save him?" Dr. Bennett took off his glasses and wiped them with a cloth from his pocket, a gesture that felt less like stalling than respect for the question. "His body?" He glanced back at the table. "Yes, I think so. It won't be quick, but yes." He put the glasses back on. "The harder part is here." He touched 2 fingers lightly to the side of his own temple. "And here." Then to his chest. Kyle said nothing. He had heard enough versions of that sentence over the years to know the weight in it. Dr. Bennett began speaking in the measured tone of someone who believed truth should be given clearly, but not cruelly. "He's not aggressive. That's not what concerns me. If anything, I'd trust aggression more right now. Aggression means energy, boundaries, some desire to stay in the fight." Mia paused briefly at that, then continued preparing an IV line. Dr. Bennett looked at the dog's face, at the stillness of it. "This one's gone inward, severely withdrawn. Minimal response to touch, sound, even stress. Loss of appetite from neglect is common, but this is more than hunger. He's not orienting toward comfort, not resisting, not seeking, not asking. That can happen when an animal has been alone too long, ignored too long, or passed through too many hands without safety." Kyle felt something tighten low in his chest. The words were clinical. The meaning was not. The dog was not fighting because somewhere along the way it had stopped believing the fight changed anything. Mia inserted the IV catheter with deft hands. The dog barely moved. Dr. Bennett noticed Kyle noticing. "He's not dangerous," the doctor said, "but he is fragile in a way people misunderstand. If he recovers physically, he may still not bond easily. He may sleep too much, refuse food at times, startle at nothing. He may improve in tiny steps that look like no progress at all." He met Kyle's eyes directly. "And if no one gives him that time, he won't make it through the long part." Kyle's gaze dropped back to the dog. The blanket beneath it was darkening where thawed snow and grime seeped down into the fleece. One ear twitched at some faraway sound. Then stillness again. The room fell quiet, except for the soft beeping of a monitor and the low hiss of the heater. Outside, a gust of wind rattled the side window. For one strange moment, Kyle was no longer in the clinic. He was in another sterile room years ago, sitting opposite a military therapist who had spoken in almost the same tone, gentle, factual, maddeningly patient. "You're functional," the woman had said. That isn't the same as healed. He remembered the way he had stared at a paper cup of coffee gone cold, and thought that if he just kept breathing, kept moving, maybe no one would ask for anything more. The dog on the table looked like that feeling made visible. As Mia adjusted the IV drip, The dog's eyes opened a little wider. Not much, just enough to focus. Its head did not lift, but the gaze moved slowly, deliberately, until it found Kyle standing beside the table. Not the doctor, not the light, not the door. Kyle. For a heartbeat, nothing else in the room seemed to exist. The dog held his eyes with a depth that felt strangely human in its weariness, as if some quiet part of it were not asking, "Who are you?" but something far more dangerous. "Are you leaving too?" Then the eyes softened, the lids lowering again, and the room returned, the heater, the drip, the muted scrape of Mia's shoes on tile. But something had already shifted. Not in the dog. In Kyle. Dr. Bennett began outlining treatment. Fluids tonight. Soft food in very small portions. Blood work to check kidney function and infection markers. Rest. Warmth. Monitoring. A follow-up plan if the dog stabilized enough to leave. Mia wrote notes on a chart and disappeared briefly, returning with a bowl of warmed broth that carried the rich smell of chicken and rice. She set it near the dog's nose. For a second, there was no response. Then the nostrils flared. A small movement. Nothing dramatic, but enough for all three humans in the room to notice. Mia smiled faintly, the kind of smile that did not celebrate too early. "There you go," she murmured, voice low and easy. "That's something." The dog's tongue touched the surface once, then again. Tiny lapse. Weak, but intentional. Dr. Bennett folded his arms. "That's good," he said. "Very good." Kyle did not trust hope in large amounts. It had betrayed too many people in too many rooms. But he trusted small things. Rhythms. Patterns. Proof that a body had chosen one more minute, then one more. He watched the dog drink. Not much. Enough. When the bowl was taken away, Dr. Bennett gave him the next truth. "If you take him home after tonight or tomorrow, understand what that means. This won't be a rescue in the cinematic sense." A faint, tired humor touched the corner of his mouth. "There won't be one magical meal and a tail wag by morning. It may be weeks before he looks at a room like he belongs in it. Months before he believes hands can be kind. And he may never become the easy kind of dog people imagine when they say second chance." Kyle leaned one hand on the edge of the exam table. "I didn't ask for easy." Dr. Bennett studied him for a moment. Something unreadable moved through the older man's face. Approval, maybe. Or caution. Possibly both. "No," he said. "I suppose you didn't." Mia glanced between them, then offered Kale a clipboard for intake forms. Name of owner, approximate age, vaccination history if known. Kale almost laughed at that last one, though no sound came out. Under owner, he hesitated. Not because he did not know what to write. Because writing it made the thing real in a way carrying the dog inside had not. He wrote, Kale Donovan. Then, under the dog's name, he paused longer. No name yet, just a blank line. He handed the clipboard back. Dr. Bennett checked the fluids once more, then looked at Kyle with the softened sternness of a man used to telling people difficult things on ordinary evenings. If you walk away now, the doctor said, someone else will decide for him. A shelter, a transfer, a system. He's old, underweight, and shut down. Those cases don't always get much time. Kyle's face did not change, but the air around him seemed to go still. He looked at the dog, at the rough fur thawing into uneven waves, at the paws worn down by weather and pavement, at the amber eyes now closed, not peacefully, but not in fear either. Then he looked back at Dr. Bennett. "How long before he can leave with me?" Mia's eyes lifted from the chart. Dr. Bennett answered carefully. "If his blood work doesn't surprise us and he keeps fluids down, tomorrow, maybe. With medication, soft food, heat, quiet, and patience that borders on irrational." Kael nodded once. "Then I'm taking him." The words were simple. So simple they almost disappeared in the room. But they changed the room anyway. Mia exhaled, not quite a laugh, not quite relief. Dr. Bennett only inclined his head, as if a decision he suspected had now been spoken aloud. "All right," the doctor said. "Then we begin." Kael placed his hand again on the dog's shoulder. This time, after a moment, the dog's breathing deepened under his palm. Not healed, not safe, not yet, but no longer entirely alone in whatever dark place it had been drifting through. Outside the clinic, the evening settled deeper over the town, blue light sinking into the snowbanks, the road turning silver beneath the first hard freeze of night. Inside, under fluorescent lights and the steady hum of machines, life remained a fragile thing. But it remained, and for now that was enough. The morning came quietly, as if it did not want to disturb anything that had survived the night. Outside the clinic, the snow had hardened into a thin crust, reflecting the pale light of a sky still undecided between gray and blue. The wind had settled, but the cold remained sharp, patient, waiting in the corners of the world. Inside, the air was warmer, softer, and the dog was still alive. Kael stood beside the exam room window, arms loosely folded, watching his own reflection more than the view beyond it. The faint outline of his face in the glass looked unchanged. Same sharp jaw, same stillness, but something behind his eyes had shifted, not softened, just occupied. Behind him, the dog lay on a thick blanket layered over the metal table, an IV line still taped carefully to its leg. The rise and fall of its chest was steadier than the night before. Not strong, not yet, but consistent. Alive, in a way that required effort. Mia entered first, carrying a clipboard and a small metal tray. Her movements were efficient, but quieter this morning, as if she had decided not to rush anything that didn't need rushing. "He kept the fluids down," she said, glancing toward Kael. "That's a good sign." Her voice held cautious optimism, the kind that didn't trust itself completely but chose to exist anyway. She checked the IV line, adjusted the tape, then crouched slightly to observe the dog's face. Up close, the details were clearer, the dry edges of the nose, the faint tremor beneath the skin, the slow blink of tired eyes that had not yet decided if waking was worth it. "Hey there," she murmured, not expecting a response. The dog did not move, but its ears shifted slightly at the sound. Mia noticed. Her lips curved, just barely. "Yeah," she whispered. "I see that." Dr. Bennett entered a few minutes later, holding a folder instead of the tablet from the night before. His posture was the same, slightly bent, shoulders relaxed, movements deliberate, but there was something different in his expression today. Less uncertainty, more direction. "Bloodwork's back," he said, flipping the folder open as he stepped closer. "Kidneys are stressed but functioning. No major infections. Severe dehydration, which we expected. He's tougher than he looks." Kael turned from the window. "That enough to take him?" Dr. Bennett glanced at him over the rim of his glasses. "You're not wasting time." Kael didn't answer. He didn't need to. The doctor nodded slowly. All right. If he keeps fluids down for a few more hours, I'll release him. But, he paused, letting the words settle. This doesn't mean he's stable. It just means he's not dying today. Mia set the tray down and began preparing a small portion of softened food. He'll need to eat often, she added. Tiny amounts, nothing heavy. And warmth, constant warmth. Kyle stepped closer to the table. The dog's eyes opened slightly at his movement. Not fully, but enough. That small awareness, fragile, uncertain, was still there. The paperwork took longer than expected. Not because it was complicated, but because it forced things into permanence. At the front desk, Mia handed him the forms again, now filled with notes, treatment plans, and instructions written in careful, legible script. Medications here, she said, tapping the page. Feeding schedule here. And, she hesitated for just a fraction of a second. He may not respond to you at first, or at all for a while. Don't take it personally. Kyle gave a short nod. Wasn't planning to. Mia studied him for a moment. There was something about him, something restrained, controlled, that made it hard to tell where he stood emotionally. But she had seen enough people bring animals through that door to recognize one thing clearly. He wasn't here out of impulse. He had already decided. Outside, a man leaned against the side of a pickup truck parked near the clinic entrance. He was broad-shouldered, thick through the chest, with a face that had been shaped more by weather than age. His beard was uneven, streaked with gray, and his eyes carried a habitual squint as if he expected trouble in every direction. This was Earl. He lived 2 houses down from Kyle, and he did not believe in unnecessary risks. He straightened when he saw Kyle emerge carrying the dog. That thing still breathing? Earl asked, not unkindly, but without softness. Kyle adjusted his grip slightly. Yeah. Earl stepped closer, boots crunching against the frozen ground. He looked down at the dog, taking in the thin frame, the dull coat, the lack of resistance. His mouth tightened. That's not a rescue, he said. That's a responsibility you're not going to get back. Kyle didn't respond immediately. The cold air moved between them. Earl crossed his arms. Had a dog once, he added after a moment. Years ago. Strong one. Smart. Got sick. Stayed up nights trying to fix something that wasn't fixable. He exhaled through his nose. Didn't make it better. Just made it harder when it ended. There was no bitterness in his voice. Just memory. Kyle met his gaze. I'm not fixing it. Earl frowned slightly. Then what are you doing? Kyle looked down at the dog. A long pause. Not leaving. Earl held that answer for a second, as if weighing it against something in his own past. Then he shook his head once. You always were like that. It wasn't said as praise or criticism, just fact. As Kyle turned toward his truck, adjusting the dog carefully in his arms, the dog made a sound. Not a bark, not a whine. A low, almost inaudible exhale, different from breathing. A shift. Its head moved, just slightly, pressing not away but into Kyle's chest. The contact was weak, barely there, but intentional. Kyle froze for half a second. Not because it surprised him, but because it didn't. As if somewhere, before logic could catch up, he had already known this wouldn't be one-sided. The drive back was slower, not because of the road, but because Kyle kept one hand lightly resting against the dog's side, feeling each breath as if it were something that needed confirmation. The town passed again, quieter in the morning light. People moved through their routines, unaware, unchanged. The cabin sat beyond the last stretch of maintained road, where the trees grew thicker and the world felt less organized. It was not large, not new. Wood siding worn by years of wind, a small porch facing the open stretch of snow-covered ground, and a single chimney that leaned just enough to show time had taken its toll. Inside, it was warm, not comfortably so, but enough. Kael carried the dog in, closing the door behind him with his foot. The space smelled faintly of wood smoke and old fabric. Simple. Functional. Lived in. He set the dog down on a blanket near the fireplace, where the heat gathered strongest. The animal shifted slightly as it touched the ground, adjusting itself with slow, careful movements. For a moment, it simply lay there. Then, its head lifted. Barely. Eyes scanning. Not in fear, but in quiet uncertainty. This was new, different, and not immediately wrong. Kael crouched a short distance away. Not too close, not too far. "Yeah," he said under his breath. "This is it." The dog lowered its head again, but not in surrender, in rest. Time moved differently in the cabin. Slower, measured in small things. A few sips of water, a shallow bowl of food, half finished. The steady crackle of firewood. Kael did not try to interact beyond what was necessary. He fed. He adjusted the blanket. He checked breathing. And he waited. By late afternoon, light stretched long across the floor, turning everything gold for a few brief minutes before fading. The dog had not moved much, but it had not shut down either. Its ears responded to sound now. Its eyes tracked movement, if only for a second at a time. Progress. Not visible from a distance, but undeniable up close. Kael sat in a chair across the room, one arm resting on his knee, watching without staring. He had learned that much. Presence mattered. Pressure did not. As the first real shadows of evening settled in, the dog shifted again. Not dramatically. Just enough to turn its body slightly so that it faced him. The distance between them remained, but the direction had changed. Kael didn't react, didn't speak. But something in his posture eased. A fraction, almost invisible. Outside, the wind picked up again, brushing against the cabin walls like a reminder of everything still waiting beyond them. Inside, the fire burned steady, and on the floor, near the warmth, a life no one had wanted to keep, had chosen not to leave. The first night in the cabin did not feel like the beginning of anything. It felt like something fragile, being allowed to continue. The fire burned low, steady and quiet, its glow stretching across the wooden floor in long amber lines. Outside, the wind pressed against the walls in soft, restless waves, like a world that refused to stop moving just because something inside had chosen to slow down. Kael did not sleep much, not because he couldn't, but because he didn't trust stillness yet. He sat in the chair near the fireplace, one boot resting flat, the other slightly forward, his posture relaxed in appearance, but alert beneath it. The old military watch on his wrist ticked quietly, each second marking something that could not be rushed. On the floor, near the warmth, the dog lay. Ghost. The name had come to him without effort, sometime between the clinic and the cabin, settling into place as naturally as breath. Not because the dog was fading, but because it had already been Somewhere else. And come back, barely. The dog didn't move much during the night. Sometimes its breathing changed, shallow, then deeper, then uneven again. Once, it shifted slightly, claws scraping faintly against the wooden floor as it adjusted its weight. The sound was small, but in the silence of the cabin, it carried. Kyle noticed every one of them, not out of fear, out of habit. Monitoring, waiting. The same way he had once listened for things that never announced themselves clearly. Around 3 a.m, the dog let out a low, almost inaudible sound. Not pain, not distress. Something else. Kyle leaned forward slightly, elbows resting on his knees. "Hey," he said quietly. No response. The dog didn't open its eyes, but its ears shifted. Just a fraction. Enough to register the voice. Kyle leaned back again. "That's fine," he murmured. He didn't move closer. Didn't reach out. He had already learned something important. This wasn't about fixing. This was about not forcing anything that hadn't chosen to happen yet. Morning arrived slowly. Light filtered through the window in pale streaks, soft and hesitant, as if testing the room before committing to it. The fire had burned down to embers, and the air carried the faint chill of a night that hadn't quite let go. Kyle stood, stretched once, then moved toward the kitchen. The sound of water running, the quiet clink of a metal bowl, the soft scrape of a spoon against ceramic. These were ordinary sounds, but in the cabin, they felt like something else. Proof that life had structure, that time still moved forward. He prepared a small portion of food, exactly as instructed. Soft, warm, not too much. He placed the bowl on the floor a short distance from where the dog lay. Then he stepped back, sat down again, waited. At first, nothing happened. The dog remained still. Eyes half open, unfocused. Then, a shift. Its nose moved. Barely. A slow intake of scent, another. The head lifted slightly, trembling with the effort. Kyle didn't react, didn't encourage, didn't speak. He let the moment exist without pressure. The dog's body followed, inch by inch, rising into a fragile, unstable position. Its legs shook under its own weight, the muscles not yet remembering how to hold. It took one step, then stopped, another, closer. The bowl remained untouched, but the distance between them had changed. And that mattered. Time stretched. The fire was rebuilt. The day moved forward. Kyle kept his distance, allowing space to remain what it was, safe, unclaimed, unforced. The dog eventually lowered itself beside the bowl. Not eating, just being there, as if proximity itself was a decision. By midday, the light had shifted, casting sharper shadows across the room. The dog had eaten a little. Not enough to call it progress in any measurable way, but enough to confirm something Kyle had already suspected. It hadn't given up completely. Not yet. There were moments when the dog seemed to disappear again. Eyes unfocused. Body still. As if it drifted somewhere far beyond the cabin walls, somewhere Kyle couldn't reach. He didn't try to follow. He didn't try to pull it back. He just stayed where he was. A fixed point, a presence that didn't leave. In the early afternoon, something changed. Not dramatically. Not in a way that would be obvious to anyone who wasn't paying attention. But Kyle noticed. The dog was lying near the fire, its body angled slightly toward the warmth. Kyle stood by the window, looking out at the tree line, when a sudden sound cut through the quiet. A sharp crack. Wood outside shifting under the cold. Kyle's head turned instinctively toward the door. At the same moment, the dog reacted. Not with fear, not with panic. It pushed itself up, faster than before, unsteady but determined. Its eyes fixed on the door, ears forward, alert. For the first time, there was something in its posture that didn't belong to exhaustion. Something older, deeper. Instinct. Memory. It stood there for a second, trembling under its own weight, as if something inside it had been called back into place without warning. Then, just as quickly, it faded. The body lowered again. The tension slipped away, and the room returned to stillness. But the moment had already happened. Kyle stared at the dog. Not confused, not surprised, just aware. Whatever had been lost wasn't gone. The rest of the day passed in small, quiet repetitions. Water, food, rest, the rhythm of something rebuilding itself, piece by fragile piece. Kyle moved through the cabin without urgency. He cleaned, stacked wood, checked the door, all the while keeping the dog within his awareness, never directly watching, but never fully turning away. By evening, the light softened again. The shadows lengthened. The fire burned steady. The dog lay in its usual place, but not exactly the same, actually. Its body was positioned slightly closer to where Kyle sat. Not touching, not seeking, but no longer avoiding. A shift so small it could have been dismissed, if it hadn't been intentional. Kyle leaned back in his chair, one hand resting loosely against his leg. He didn't speak, didn't acknowledge it. Some things didn't need recognition to be real. Outside, the wind returned, brushing against the cabin in long, low breaths. Inside, the air held warmth, and something else. Not trust, not yet, but the beginning of something that could become it. The dog's eyes opened briefly, not fully, just enough to take in the room. The fire, the walls, the man sitting a few feet away. It didn't look confused. It didn't look afraid. It just observed. Then, slowly, its head lowered again, but this time the body remained angled toward him. Kyle closed his eyes for a moment. Not to sleep, just to rest in the space that had been created. No expectations, no demands, just presence. There were no breakthroughs, no sudden changes, no visible transformation, only something quieter, more difficult to see, but harder to break. A life that had been ready to end was learning, slowly, how to stay. Morning did not arrive all at once. It crept in. A thin line of pale light pressed through the edge of the window frame, stretching slowly across the wooden floor until it reached the edge of the blanket where the dog lay. The fire had gone out sometime before dawn, leaving behind a faint scent of ash and warm wood that lingered in the air like a memory that refused to fade. Kyle was already awake. He had moved from the chair at some point during the night to the edge of the room, leaning against the wall with his arms folded, eyes half closed, but never fully asleep. It wasn't discomfort that kept him there. It was familiarity. Rest had never come easily when something fragile depended on it. The cabin was quiet. No wind, no movement outside. Just the slow, steady rhythm of breathing. Not his, the dog's. Ghost. The name had settled in fully now, no longer just a passing thought. It fit in a way that didn't need explanation. Because Ghost wasn't just recovering, it was returning. The dog shifted. Not abruptly, not with urgency, but with intention. Its head lifted, slightly higher than it had the day before. The movement was slow, controlled, as if each muscle had to remember its purpose before acting. Its ears twitched at the faint crack of wood settling in the stove. Kyle noticed. Of course he did. He stepped into the kitchen without looking directly at the dog, keeping his movements deliberate, predictable. The sound of water filling a bowl echoed softly in the stillness. The routine had already begun to form small, repeatable actions that gave structure to something otherwise uncertain. He set the food down again. Same place, same distance. Then stepped back. Ghost didn't move immediately. It watched. The eyes were clearer now, not sharp, not alert in the way a healthy dog would be, but no longer lost. There was direction behind them. Thought. Recognition that something existed outside of its own fading state. The smell reached it. Warm, familiar in a distant, almost forgotten way. The body responded before the mind fully caught up. A shift. A slow push upward. The legs held a little longer this time before trembling. One step, then another. Kyle stayed still, not encouraging, not interfering. The distance closed gradually, each inch earned. Ghost lowered itself beside the bowl. Paused. Then it ate. Not much, still cautious, but no hesitation. Kyle let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. He didn't smile, didn't react outwardly. But something in his posture changed. A fraction less tension in the shoulders, a fraction more weight settling into the moment. The day moved forward in small, quiet increments, the kind of progress that didn't announce itself, but existed anyway. Ghost drank more water, shifted positions on its own, even adjusted the blanket once, circling slightly before lowering itself again. Each movement small, each one deliberate, each one chosen. Around midday, Kyle stepped outside. Not far. Just enough to check the perimeter, clear a path where the snow had begun to harden unevenly. The cold air hit sharp against his face, grounding in a way that nothing else was. The world beyond the cabin remained unchanged. Trees, snow, distance. No one came out here unless they meant to, and Kyle rarely did anything by accident. When he stepped back inside, the temperature shift was immediate. Warmth, stillness, and something else. Ghost was not where he had left it. For a fraction of a second, Kyle's body reacted before his mind did. His posture tightened, eyes scanning, every detail registering at once. Then, he saw it. Ghost had moved. Not far, but far enough. The dog was no longer near the fire. It stood unsteady, but upright closer to the center of the room, facing the door. Not in fear, not in confusion, but in stillness, as if it had followed something, or was waiting for something that wasn't there. Kyle didn't speak, didn't approach immediately. He watched. Ghost's ears flicked once, its body swayed slightly with the effort of standing. Then, slowly, it turned its head. Not toward the fire, not toward the room. toward him. And in that moment, there was no distance in its eyes, not fully trust. Not yet. But awareness. Clear. Present. Alive. Kyle stepped forward. Slowly. Carefully. Not wanting to break whatever had just happened. Ghost didn't retreat. Didn't tense. It simply held its position until its legs could no longer support it, then lowered itself again. Closer to him now. Not by accident. Kyle crouched, not reaching, not touching, just lowering himself to the same level. "That's good," he said quietly. The words weren't praise. They weren't instruction. They were acknowledgement. The rest of the afternoon passed without interruption. But something had shifted. Not dramatically, not visibly to anyone outside, but inside the space, there was less distance. Kyle moved more freely now. Not because he trusted the situation, but because he understood it better. Ghost watched him. Not constantly. Not intensely. But enough. Following movement with its eyes, tracking sound with more clarity, responding to presence in ways it hadn't before. Later, Kyle sat down near the wall again, one leg extended, the other bent. The same position as the night before. Familiar. Unthreatening. Ghost lay a few feet away. Then, after a long stretch of stillness, it shifted. Not toward the fire. Not toward the door. Toward him. Only a few inches, but enough to change the space between them. Kyle didn't move, didn't acknowledge it. He let the moment pass as if it were nothing, because forcing meaning onto something fragile often broke it. The light outside began to fade again, the sky turning that deep, quiet blue that came just before night fully settled. Inside, the cabin held its warmth. And something new. Not safety. Not yet. But direction. Ghost's breathing was steadier now. Still shallow at times. Still uneven in moments. But no longer fading. No longer disappearing. Kyle leaned his head back against the wall, eyes half-lidded. Not asleep. Not fully alert. Balanced somewhere in between. The kind of stillness that allowed things to exist without pressure. On the floor, Ghost's eyes opened once more. It looked toward Kyle. Held that image for a moment. Then, slowly, its body settled deeper into the blanket. Not collapsing, not withdrawing, just resting. And for the first time, it didn't look like something waiting to end. It looked like something learning how to stay. The storm did not arrive like a warning. It arrived like a decision. By late afternoon, the sky had sealed itself shut, thick clouds pressing low over the tree line, swallowing what little light remained. The air had changed hours before the first snow fell. Colder. Heavier. The kind of cold that didn't just touch skin, but settled into bone. Kyle noticed it the moment he stepped outside that morning. Not because it looked different, but because it felt familiar. The kind of shift that came before things went wrong. Inside the cabin, Ghost lay near the fireplace, its body curled slightly, conserving warmth. The difference now was subtle, but real. Its breathing no longer carried that distant, fading quality. It was present, anchored, not strong, but here. Kyle moved through the space with the same quiet efficiency as always. He added wood to the fire, checked the door seals, made sure the supplies near the entry were accessible. Preparation, not panic. He had learned long ago that storms didn't care if you were ready. But it helped. By midday, the first snow began to fall. Not heavy, just enough to cover tracks. Erase edges. Ghost lifted its head at the sound against the roof. Its ears turned. Listening. Not with fear, with awareness. Kyle noticed. Yeah, he muttered under his breath. It's coming. He didn't plan to go out, not far, just enough to check the outer path, clear the small stretch near the cabin where ice tended to build under fresh snow. Routine. Something controlled. Ghost watched him as he reached for his jacket. Its body shifted slightly. Not rising, but alert. Kyle paused for half a second, then shook his head once. Stay. The word was soft, not a command, but a boundary. Ghost didn't move. Outside, the cold hit harder than expected. The wind had picked up, sharper now, cutting across the open space between the trees. Snow moved sideways more than down, carried by gusts that changed direction without warning. Kyle stepped carefully, boots pressing into the forming layer, scanning the ground ahead out of habit more than necessity. The path was still visible. Barely. He crouched near the edge of the clearing, brushing away snow from a patch of ice, clearing just enough space to keep footing stable. A simple task. Measured. Predictable. Then, the wind shifted. Harder. Faster. The world around him blurred for a second as snow lifted and spun, reducing distance to shapes and movement. Kyle stood, turned back toward the cabin. The door was still visible, but less clearly now. The storm was building faster than it should have. He took a step, then another. The ground beneath his boot shifted. Ice, hidden under fresh snow. His foot slid, not far, but enough. Balance broke, weight shifted wrong. He went down hard, his leg twisting under him at an angle that didn't belong. The impact knocked the air from his chest. For a second, nothing. No sound, no breath. Just the shock of it. Then pain, sharp, immediate, focused. Kyle exhaled slowly, forcing his lungs to work again. His hand moved instinctively to his leg. Not broken, but not right. Weight would be a problem. Movement would be slower. The storm didn't care, inside the cabin. Ghost stood, not fully steady, but upright. Its head turned toward the door. Ears forward, body still. The sound of wind, the absence of footsteps. Something didn't align. Outside, Kyle pushed himself up. One knee, then the other, testing weight. The leg held. Barely. Enough. He took a step, then another. Slower now. More deliberate. The distance to the cabin hadn't changed, but the effort had. The wind rose again. Stronger. Snow thickened. The world narrowed. Edges disappeared. Direction became guesswork. Kyle stopped. Adjusted. Focused on one point. The outline of the cabin door. Faint. But there. Behind him, a shape moved. Kyle turned his head, through the shifting curtain of snow. Ghost. The dog had made it outside. Its body moved through the storm with unsteady determination, each step a visible effort. The wind pushed against it, the cold biting into its already weakened frame. It shouldn't have been there. It shouldn't have had the strength. And yet, it kept coming, not toward the trees, not away from danger, toward him. Kyle's jaw tightened. "What are you doing?" he muttered, voice nearly lost to the wind. Ghost didn't stop. It reached him, body low, leaning slightly into his leg, not for support, not for balance, but for position, for alignment. Kyle understood. Not in words, not logically, but instinctively. They moved together. Each step was slower, more controlled. Ghost stayed close, not leading, not following, matching. The cabin door grew clearer, the shape solidifying through the storm. Kyle pushed forward, ignoring the pain in his leg, focusing only on the distance left. Ghost stumbled once, recovered, kept moving. They reached the door. Kyle's hand found the handle, pushed. The door opened against the wind with resistance, then gave. Inside, warmth, stillness, air that didn't fight back. Kyle stepped in, turning quickly to close the door behind them. The sound of the wind dulled instantly. Contained. For a moment, neither of them moved. Ghost stood near the entrance, breathing hard. Its body trembled, not from fear, but from exertion, from cold, from something deeper. Kyle leaned against the wall, one hand braced, the other resting briefly on his leg. Pain. Manageable. He looked at the dog. "You weren't supposed to come out." Ghost didn't respond. It didn't need to. Kyle moved toward the fire, adding wood, rebuilding heat. Ghost followed. Slowly, but without hesitation. As the warmth returned to the room, something else settled with it. Not relief, not safety, but certainty. Kyle lowered himself into the chair again, this time with less control than usual, his leg stretched slightly to ease the strain. Ghost lay down nearby, closer than before, closer than, not touching, but within reach. The storm outside intensified. Wind pressed harder against the walls. Snow piled against the edges of the cabin. The world beyond shrank to nothing. Inside, the fire burned, steady, unmoving. Kyle closed his eyes for a moment. Not in exhaustion, in acknowledgement. Ghost's breathing slowed, evened out, still fragile, but no longer fading. The storm had come, and for the first time, neither of them had faced it alone. The storm did not end. It settled in, like something that had decided to stay longer than it was welcome. Through the night, the wind pressed against the cabin walls in long, relentless waves, rattling the wood just enough to remind anything inside that the world beyond was still there, and still dangerous. Snow gathered along the edges of the structure, building slowly, quietly, turning the outside into something distant and unreachable. Inside, the fire held. Kyle had kept it alive through the night, feeding it in steady intervals, each movement slower than usual. His leg had stiffened, the pain no longer sharp but deep and constant, settling into the muscle like a quiet warning that refused to fade. He adjusted his weight when needed, but never complained. Pain, to him, was never an obstacle. It was information. And right now, it told him something simple. He wasn't going far. Ghost lay closer than before, not touching, but near enough that the distance between them no longer felt accidental. The dog's breathing had steadied through the night. It was still weak, still carrying the exhaustion of everything it had survived, but it was no longer fading. It was anchored. Present in a way it hadn't been before. Morning arrived without light. The sky remained sealed behind thick clouds, leaving the world outside muted, colorless. When Kyle stepped near the door and tested his leg again, the result was the same. He could stand, he could move, but not far, not fast. Every step would matter, every decision would cost something. He turned back into the room. Ghost was awake, watching him. Not sharply, not intensely, but aware. That quiet awareness had become familiar now, like something that no longer needed to prove itself to be real. Hours passed with little change. The storm shifted, but never truly stopped. Inside, the rhythm remained steady: fire, water, small portions of food, rest. Ghost ate again, more than before, still careful, still measured, but no longer hesitant. That alone would have been enough to mark the day as progress. But something else was building. Kyle felt it before he understood it. The air inside the cabin had changed, not colder, not heavier, but expectant, the kind of stillness that comes just before something interrupts it. Then the sound came. Faint, barely there. A dull, irregular noise carried through the wind. Kyle stilled immediately, his attention narrowing. Years of instinct did not fade with time. They simply waited. He turned his head slightly, listening again. There, again. Not the wind, not the structure, something else. Ghost reacted before he moved. The dog's head lifted sharply, ears forward, body tense in a way Kyle had never seen before. This wasn't fear. It wasn't confusion. It was recognition. The kind that came from somewhere deeper than thought. Ghost pushed itself up, faster than it should have been able to. Its legs trembled under the effort, but it didn't stop. It moved toward the door with a quiet urgency, stopping just short of it before turning its head slightly toward Kyle. Not asking. Not hesitating. But expecting. Kyle frowned, eyes shifting between the dog and the door. "What is it?" he asked, voice low, controlled. Ghost didn't answer. It didn't need to. Kyle stepped forward, each movement careful, controlled against the strain in his leg. He reached the door, his hand resting on the handle for a moment longer than necessary. Something about the stillness on the other side of it felt different now. Not empty. He opened it. The wind hit immediately, sharp and unforgiving, carrying snow into the cabin in a sudden burst of cold. The outside world was still blurred, still unstable, but now there was something in it. A shape. Moving. At first it was barely more than a distortion in the white, then it resolved into something human. A man. He moved unevenly, half bent against the wind, one arm raised instinctively to shield his face. His coat was heavy but worn, the fabric stiff with cold and layered in snow. He wasn't walking toward anything, just forward, blindly, as if motion itself was the only thing keeping him upright. Lost. Kyle stepped out just enough to see more clearly. The man stumbled, nearly went down, caught himself, then continued. There was no direction in his movement, no awareness of where he was going. Ghost didn't wait. The dog stepped out into the storm. "Ghost!" The word came out sharper than Kyle intended, but it didn't stop the movement. Ghost moved forward, body low against the wind, each step deliberate despite the strain. It didn't rush. It didn't hesitate. It simply moved in a straight line toward the man. Kyle followed. There was no choice in it. The cold hit harder this time, the distance stretching under his injured leg. Every step pulled against the strain, slowing him, forcing him to focus on balance, on control. But ahead of him, Ghost reached the man and stopped. The man looked down. Confused. Startled. His face came into focus, mid-40s, worn not by age but by experience, dark stubble uneven across his jaw, skin pale under the cold, lips cracked, eyes unfocused with exhaustion. There was something about him that suggested he wasn't used to losing control, and yet here he was, completely at the mercy of something larger than himself. Ghost didn't bark, didn't move erratically. It simply stood there, a fixed point in a world that had lost all others. The man steadied himself, his gaze shifting from the dog to the cabin behind it. Recognition flickered direction. Finally something real to move toward. Kyle reached them, breath controlled despite the effort. "You're heading the wrong way," he said. The man blinked, struggling to focus. I couldn't see." "I know," Kyle replied, cutting through the explanation before it mattered. Ghost shifted slightly, stepping aside just enough to allow space without leaving position. Together they moved back. Slowly, step by step. The cabin grew clearer, solid, real against the storm. When they reached the door, Kyle pushed it open again, guiding the man inside before stepping in after him. The door shut, the wind cut off. Silence returned. The man leaned against the wall, breathing hard, his body still shaking from cold and disorientation. Kyle didn't ask questions. Not yet. Ghost moved back toward the fire and lowered itself carefully, the effort visible now that the urgency had passed. Its breathing slowed again, settling into something steady. Kyle stood there for a moment, looking at the dog, then at the man, then back at the fire. Outside, the storm continued, unchanged, indifferent. Inside, the space held something different. 3 lives, 1 room, and for the first time, none of them had been left behind. Sometimes miracles don't arrive as light from the sky or voices in the wind. Sometimes they come quietly, in the form of someone who stays when they have every reason to walk away. In a world that often moves too fast to notice pain, choosing to stay, to care, to not leave something broken behind that itself is a kind of miracle. And maybe, just maybe, that is how God works most of the time. Not through grand signs, but through ordinary people who decide to do something extraordinary with their kindness. Kyle did not set out to change the world. Ghost did not have the strength to save anyone. And yet, in the middle of cold, silence, and struggle, they became the answer to each other's survival. That is what grace can look like. Not perfect, not easy, but real. Maybe in your life right now there is something or someone who feels forgotten, overlooked, or too far gone. Maybe you feel that way yourself. And maybe this story is a quiet reminder that no soul is beyond reaching, and no act of compassion is ever wasted. God sees what the world ignores, and sometimes He sends someone just in time. If this story touched your heart, take a moment to share it with someone who might need it today. Leave a comment and tell us where you are watching from, or what part of this story stayed with you the most. And if you believe in stories that remind us to be better, to care more, and to hold on a little longer, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next one. May God bless you, protect you, and guide you through whatever season you are walking through. And may you always find the strength to stay when it matters most.